Some buildings feel inviting. Others make you feel small. Think of the public spaces you know. City halls, housing estates, schools, grey walls, long corridors, cold fluorescent light, hard surfaces that echo your steps, spaces built less for comfort than for control. This isn't only about how they look, it's about how design shapes your movements, your voice, your sense of belonging. In this episode, we step inside one of the most debated styles of the last century, brutalism. We'll walk its concrete corridors, stand in its monumental plazas, and hear from the architects, critics and residents who live with its legacy. Brutalism is more than concrete and geometry. It's a mirror of our highest ambitions and our deepest missteps. You may love it, you may hate it. But once you've seen it, you'll never look at a building, or a city, the same way again. Brutalism takes its name from the French phrase béton brut, meaning raw concrete. The term came from the work of Swiss-French architect Le Corbusier, who used the phrase to describe concrete left in its natural, unfinished state after the formwork was removed. He saw beauty in the rough texture and in the honesty of showing the material as it was, without plaster or paint to hide its true nature. This approach influenced a generation of architects who sought to make buildings that looked solid, direct, and unpretentious. After World War II, many cities faced the task of rebuilding quickly. Whole neighborhoods had been destroyed by bombing. There was a severe shortage of building materials like steel, stone, and timber. Concrete was cheap, easy to make from local ingredients, and could be poured into molds to form almost any shape. Governments also needed to build large numbers of homes, schools, and public buildings for people displaced by the war. These conditions gave brutalism a practical advantage, and its visual style became tied to the idea of social progress and civic responsibility. Brutalist buildings have certain core features. The most obvious is exposed, unplastered concrete. You can often see the imprint of the wooden boards used to shape it. This is not a flaw but an intentional part of the design, showing the process of construction. The buildings often have monumental geometry, with massive blocks, heavy overhangs, and bold cantilevers. Their forms can feel stark and uncompromising. Ornamentation is minimal or absent. Instead of decorative carvings or moldings, the interest comes from the way light and shadow play across large surfaces and deep recesses. The idea is that form follows function. The shape of the building comes directly from its use, structure and materials, without unnecessary extras. Brutalism differs from modernism in its attitude toward materials and weight. Modernist architecture often seeks lightness, smoothness, and visual openness, using steel frames and glass walls to make buildings appear airy. Brutalism embraces mass and solidity, preferring the tactile presence of concrete. It also differs from minimalism, which aims for visual simplicity but often in refined, polished finishes. Brutalism can look rough and unfinished by comparison. High-tech architecture focuses on displaying advanced engineering and industrial components, like exposed steel beams and mechanical systems. Brutalism, by contrast, highlights concrete as a humble universal material rather than a showcase for technology. Imagine standing under Boston City Hall, one of the best-known brutalist buildings in the United States. The concrete rises above you in huge angular volumes. The overhangs feel heavy, as if carved from a single mass. Deep shadows form under the projecting upper levels. The texture of the concrete is coarse, patterned with the grain of the wooden molds used to cast it. The plaza around you is open, making the building feel even larger and more dominant. The structure does not try to charm you, instead it confronts you with its scale and weight, making you aware of your smallness. There is a sense of order in the repetition of windows and the rhythm of solid and void, but also a raw physicality that you can feel in your body. The sound of footsteps echoes sharply, the air feels cooler in the shadows. This is not a space designed to be invisible, it is meant to be present, to assert itself as part of the city's civic identity. When seen in this way, brutalism is less about style than about a way of thinking. It values honesty in materials, direct expression of structure, and the creation of spaces that feel both functional and monumental. It emerged from a time when building meant responding to urgent needs with straightforward solutions, and its physical form reflects that urgency. The concrete, the geometry, and the absence of decoration all tell a story about the time and the purpose for which these buildings were made. Brutalism was not only an architectural style but also a political statement. It emerged at a time when governments and planners aimed to provide housing and public buildings for everyone. not just the wealthy. Many brutalist projects were built for working-class communities, or as civic landmarks intended to serve all citizens equally. The use of raw concrete was not simply an aesthetic choice. It was a practical material for mass construction, and it symbolized honesty and equality. Concrete looked the same whether used for a housing block or a city hall, sending the message that all functions of public life deserved the same level of permanence and respect. Architects saw brutalism as a way to express egalitarian ideals in built form. In many post-war societies, there was a belief that good housing, access to culture, and civic pride could strengthen democracy. Large housing estates were designed with open courtyards, shared walkways, and community facilities to encourage social interaction. The style's solid forms and visible structure were meant to create a sense of dignity for residents, a contrast to the flimsy and cramped housing many had endured before. Allison and Peter Smithson, two leading British architects, said that brutalism was an ethic, not an aesthetic, and that it aimed to reveal the building's true nature, rather than disguise it. For them, the rawness was part of the honesty, no pretense, no decoration masking the function. Anti-ornament sentiment was central to brutalism. Many architects of the movement rejected traditional decoration as wasteful and deceptive. Le Corbusier wrote that architecture should be truthful, and that beauty comes from the correct use of materials and proportion, not from applied ornament. He admired the way concrete could be shaped directly into the structural forms needed, without extra layers. Denis Lusdun, who designed London's National Theatre, spoke of architecture as a social art and insisted that his work should house the activities of man without distraction. The refusal of ornament was also a rejection of bourgeois tastes, which often favored luxury finishes and historic styles. By stripping buildings to their structural essence, brutalists sought to align architecture with the needs of the many rather than the preferences of the few. However, the political ambitions of brutalism often clashed with the realities of life in these buildings. Many projects were planned with utopian ideas about community. Walkways in the sky, open public plazas, and shared amenities were meant to create spaces where people would meet and interact. In practice, these spaces could become neglected or unsafe, especially when funding for maintenance ran out. The exposed concrete, which looked bold in an architect's drawings, could appear harsh and unwelcoming in a grey winter climate. Large blocks could feel isolating rather than communal. When combined with poor management or social challenges, some estates gained reputations for being difficult places to live. The Smithsons themselves faced this problem. Their Robin Hood Gardens housing estate in London was designed with the principle of streets in the sky. Elevated walkways meant to replace the sense of community from traditional streets, yet residents often felt these walkways were empty and unsafe. Without the steady upkeep and social support the architects had imagined, the intended sense of shared life did not always develop. This gap between vision and reality became a recurring theme in the history of brutalism. Buildings that were supposed to be symbols of equality and civic pride could be seen by their users as oppressive or alienating. Still, for many architects and planners, brutalism represented a sincere attempt to respond to urgent social needs with the tools available. The political climate of the post-war period emphasized reconstruction, fairness, and the role of the state in providing for its citizens. In this context, the use of strong enduring materials and monumental forms was a statement of commitment. A school or a library built in concrete was meant to last for generations, a sign that public investment was as permanent as the stone of historic monuments. Even the aesthetic of weight and solidity carried political meaning. It suggested stability, protection, and shared ownership. One way to understand this is to imagine approaching a brutalist civic building like a courthouse or a town hall. The steps are broad, and the facade rises in thick horizontal bands. The concrete walls are heavy and unbroken, except for deep-set windows. There is no gilding, no marble, no polished wood. You can see the marks left by the construction process. The building says, without words, that it belongs to the people, not to a ruling elite. It does not flatter the visitor, but it offers a clear statement of purpose. The lack of ornament is not an absence of care, but a deliberate rejection of unnecessary display. It is the architecture of equality expressed in structure and form. Le Corbusier once described his approach as architecture of truth, believing that if a building showed its structure and material honestly, it would speak to everyone without the coded language of class or wealth. The Smithsons argued that brutalism's directness could connect people more strongly to their built environment, because it made no attempt to hide its making. Lusdun, reflecting on his own work, described architecture as a background to life, suggesting that it should serve society without drawing attention to itself through decorative flourishes. These ideas placed brutalism firmly in the realm of political architecture, tied to social ideals and public responsibility. The tension between these ideals and their outcomes is what makes brutalism so contested. For some, the massive concrete forms still stand as proof of a time when architecture sought to embody fairness and shared civic life. For others, they are reminders of failed experiments in planning and design, where the physical reality did not match the hopeful theory. In either case, the political and philosophical roots of the style remain visible in its most famous buildings, in their material honesty, their rejection of ornament, and their ambition to make architecture serve the many rather than the few. Cité Radieuse, in Marseille, was commissioned soon after the end of the Second World War. France faced a severe housing crisis, with entire districts damaged or destroyed. Le Corbusier was asked to design a building that could provide homes for many families, while also offering the facilities needed for daily life. He imagined not just an apartment block but a vertical garden city, a single structure that could function as a self-contained community. Construction began in 1947 and finished in 1952, using reinforced concrete as the primary material. This choice reflected the shortage of traditional building supplies and the need for a fast, adaptable method. The building is long and elevated on large pilotis, or concrete columns, lifting it above the ground. Its facade shows a rhythmic grid of loggias in bright colors set against raw concrete. Inside, Le Corbusier arranged the apartments like interlocking units on 2 levels, so each home stretches from one side of the building to the other. This allows cross-ventilation and light from both directions. Corridors, called internal streets, run through the building every 3rd floor, wide enough for residents to stop and talk without blocking others. The design aimed to balance privacy and community, with spaces that encouraged encounters without forcing them. Le Corbusier's city within a building idea included more than just homes. The Cité Radieuse has a range of facilities built into its structure. There are shops, a post office, and offices, all located on a mid-level street so residents could shop or do errands without leaving the building. A school and nursery were added to support families, reducing the need for children to travel far. On the roof, Le Corbusier created a communal terrace with a running track, open-air gym, and a paddling pool. The terrace also includes a sculptural ventilation tower and a small stage for performances. His intention was to give residents access to both practical services and leisure activities within a single walkable environment. In 2016, UNESCO listed Cité Radieuse as a World Heritage Site, along with several other works by Le Corbusier. The designation recognized the building as an outstanding example of his architectural philosophy and as a significant experiment in post-war housing. The UNESCO citation praised its integration of living spaces and communal facilities, its innovative use of modular design, and its influence on later housing projects around the world. It stands as one of the most famous works associated with early brutalism, though Le Corbusier himself predated the label and preferred to describe his concrete surfaces as béton brut. Resident experiences at Cité Radieuse have shifted over time. In the early years, the building drew praise for its modern amenities and generous layouts. Many residents appreciated the light-filled apartments, the sense of community fostered by the internal streets, and the convenience of having shops and schools on site. For families moving from cramped, unsanitary housing, the change was dramatic. The rooftop terrace in particular became a valued space for social life, exercise and children's play. The building's design encouraged a feeling that residents were part of a distinct, shared environment. Over time, however, criticism emerged. The raw concrete surfaces could feel cold and unwelcoming, especially when weathered. Some shops closed as shopping habits changed, leaving gaps in the original mix of services. The building's scale and repetitive facade, while admired by architects, could appear imposing to outsiders. Maintenance became a challenge, as with many concrete structures, and parts of the building showed wear when upkeep was insufficient. Some residents found the internal streets too long and impersonal, creating a sense of distance rather than intimacy. The original vision depended on active community management and constant adaptation, which was not always possible. The experience of Cité Radieuse reveals lessons about the social mission of brutalism. The project succeeded in providing high-quality housing that combined private space with shared amenities. The cross-ventilated apartments, generous ceiling heights, and careful orientation still meet high living standards decades later. The integration of services reduced the need for travel and helped create a sense of belonging. At the same time, the criticisms show that physical design alone cannot sustain community life. Social spaces need active programming, and facilities must adapt to changes in lifestyle and commerce. Without this, the communal areas risk becoming underused. Cité Radieuse also shows how monumental concrete architecture can be both inspiring and alienating. For residents who value its openness, thoughtful layout, and rooftop life, the building works as intended. For those more sensitive to its scale and material, it can feel heavy and impersonal. The lesson is that the social ideals behind brutalism, equality, community, and shared resources, require more than structural provision. They depend on ongoing investment, responsive management, and a willingness to adjust to evolving needs. Le Corbusier's Marseille building remains a landmark because it embodied these ideals in concrete form, but its mixed reception reflects the gap between architectural ambition and the lived reality of communal housing. Brutalism has a devoted following that spans architects, preservationists, photographers, and casual admirers. For architects, the appeal lies in the style's clarity of purpose and its refusal to disguise structure or materials. A brutalist building does not pretend to be light if it is heavy, nor does it hide how it is made. This directness appeals to designers who see architecture as a craft rooted in honesty. Preservationists value brutalism because it represents a particular moment in post-war history when civic ambition and social responsibility shaped the built environment. To them, demolishing these structures erases both architectural innovation and social history. Urban romantics are drawn to brutalism for different reasons. They appreciate the way these buildings dominate the skyline, the way their shapes break from the softer lines of older architecture. For some, walking past a massive concrete structure creates a sense of awe, like encountering a piece of geology placed in the middle of the city. They value the way the style stands apart from the polished glass towers that now fill many urban centers. Its raw surfaces and solid geometry offer a counterpoint to the smooth, reflective facades of contemporary development. Photographers, particularly on social media, have made brutalism more visible to a wide audience. Instagram accounts dedicated to the style show the patterns of shadows across deep recesses, the sharp lines of cantilevered balconies, and the texture of weathered concrete. Some focus on unexpected juxtapositions, like cats perched against massive walls on the account at Cats of Brutalism, or the regional variations featured on at African_Brutalism. These images often make buildings appear abstract, highlighting form and texture over their function as housing or offices. The internet has turned what was once a niche architectural interest into a global community of enthusiasts who share photos, histories, and preservation campaigns. One reason for this affection is the aesthetic of integrity that comes with brutalist buildings. Because the materials are exposed, they age visibly. Concrete darkens in the rain, gathers moss in damp climates, or develops fine cracks over time. To admirers, this weathering does not diminish the building, but adds depth and character. The marks of decades become part of its identity, proof that it has endured. Where some see decay, devotees see a patina that reflects the building's life within its environment. The texture of a wall in its 50th year tells a different story than when it was first poured, and many find this transformation beautiful. Online communities have amplified this appreciation. The Brutalism Appreciation Society, a group with more than 260,000 members, shares images, news, and debates about the style's merits and challenges. Members post everything from rare architectural drawings to everyday snapshots of concrete staircases. These spaces allow people from around the world to participate in a conversation that was once limited to local architects or scholars. Through these platforms, buildings under threat of demolition can gain international attention, sometimes rallying enough support to be saved. Brutalism's visual qualities have also made it popular in gaming and pop culture. Video games like Control use brutalist settings to create a mood of mystery and authority. The game's main environment, the Federal Bureau of Control, is a fictional government building rendered in massive blocks of concrete, with long shadows and cavernous halls. Its architecture shapes the atmosphere, suggesting both power and unease. Films like Dread, set in dystopian cities, often choose brutalist backdrops because their scale and starkness suggest systems larger than the individual, capable of both order and oppression. These portrayals tap into the emotional range of brutalism, which can feel protective in one moment and intimidating in the next. The connection to pop culture also reinforces brutalism's presence in the public imagination. When players move through a brutalist space in a game, or when viewers see characters framed by its angular shadows on screen, they experience the architecture as part of the story's emotional fabric. This exposure can lead people to seek out similar buildings in real life, to stand under their overhangs or walk along their deep-set corridors. The more they engage with the physical reality of these spaces, the more they notice details like how light pools in a recess or how sound carries in an open concrete atrium. Even within this following, people admire brutalism for different and sometimes contradictory reasons. For some, it is the embodiment of an ideal, architecture as a public service, built to last and available to all. For others, it is an aesthetic experience appreciated for its shapes, textures, and interplay with light. For photographers, it can be a formal exercise in composition. For gamers and filmmakers, it is a stage set for drama, power, and tension. What unites them is the recognition that brutalism offers something distinct in the built environment, a form of architecture that does not fade into the background but demands to be noticed, studied, and remembered. Brutalism attracts as much criticism as admiration, and many of the arguments against it have been consistent for decades. One of the most common complaints is that these buildings feel cold and inhuman. The scale can be overwhelming, with massive walls and deep shadows that seem to dwarf the individual. In housing developments, long corridors and repetitive facades can give the impression that people are living inside machines rather than homes. For those who prefer warmth, variety, and natural materials, the exposed concrete and monumental geometry can seem alienating. Another criticism is that brutalist buildings age poorly. Concrete, while durable, reacts visibly to weather and pollution. Without regular upkeep, it can stain, crack, or spall, exposing rusted reinforcing bars. In a well-maintained structure, these signs of age might be seen as character, but when neglected, they can make a building look abandoned or unsafe. In public perception, this decline is often linked to the style itself, even though the real problem may be lack of maintenance rather than the architecture. Over time, some brutalist housing estates became associated with social problems, further damaging the style's reputation. Monotony is another issue, especially in large developments. When entire districts were rebuilt in the post-war years, the drive for efficiency and cost control sometimes led to repetitive block designs. A row of near-identical concrete towers can appear uniform to the point of dreariness. What might be striking as a single building can feel oppressive when multiplied across a neighborhood. This effect was often worsened by stripped-down budgets that eliminated the variation and public spaces that could have softened the scale. Bad imitations have also hurt brutalism's image. In the rush to meet housing needs, many projects copied the look of exposed concrete and blocky forms without the careful planning that gave the best examples their quality. Poorly proportioned facades, cramped layouts, and inadequate communal areas could leave residents with none of the intended benefits and all of the perceived drawbacks. These imitations reinforced the idea that brutalism was cheap, uncomfortable, and ugly, even though they lacked the thought and craft of its most respected works. Film has played a role in shaping public attitudes, often using brutalist settings as shorthand for dystopia. In RoboCop, the architecture of crime-ridden Detroit includes looming concrete structures that project authority and menace. Their scale and lack of ornament help set the tone for a story about corporate power and urban decay. In Resident Evil Afterlife, brutalist backdrops are used to suggest a world stripped of warmth and humanity. The harsh lines, deep shadows, and empty plazas become visual signals that the environment is hostile or dehumanizing. These portrayals fix the style in the popular imagination as a fitting stage for oppression and control. To understand the emotional divide, imagine two audio scenes. In one, you stand in a large echoing concrete plaza, your footsteps are sharp, and each sound carries, returning to you from multiple surfaces. The space feels exposed yet somehow enclosed, the air still, the silence broken only by the occasional car passing in the distance. The acoustics amplify isolation. In the other scene, you are in a lively public square paved in stone, surrounded by cafes and trees. People's voices blend into a warm hum, and the sound of cutlery, bicycles, and street music mixes into a changing rhythm. The difference is not only in what you see but in how the space shapes sound, and with it, your sense of belonging. This contrast explains why some people experience brutalist environments as oppressive. The same physical qualities that admirers see as honest and monumental, heavy materials, large spans, unadorned surfaces, can register as unfriendly to those who seek softness, intimacy, or variety in the built environment. Without the social and architectural elements that bring life into these spaces, their scale and materiality can dominate the senses rather than welcome them. The Barbican Centre in London was not always celebrated. When it opened in the early 1980s, critics called it ugly and unwelcoming, a fortress of concrete that felt cut off from the city around it. Words like concrete jungle appeared in newspapers, and many Londoners found its scale and material harsh compared to the glass and brick they were used to. Some people struggled to navigate its elevated walkways and layered plazas, seeing them as confusing rather than inspiring. The buildings loomed over the surrounding streets, and for those who associated brutalism with failed post-war housing estates, the Barbican seemed like more of the same. Over time, its reputation began to change. The arts center inside became a major cultural destination, hosting concerts, theater, film, and exhibitions. The complex's integration of homes, gardens, and public venues began to attract people who valued its self-contained world in the middle of the city. Residents enjoyed being able to attend a play, visit an art gallery, or walk through landscaped gardens without leaving the estate. Visitors came for cultural events and discovered the striking geometry, the sweeping terraces, and the sense of calm in the raised gardens. The same concrete that once seemed bleak began to feel iconic, part of the Barbican's distinctive identity. The layout is one of its defining features. The complex sits on a series of elevated walkways, known as the high walks, that link different blocks and connect directly to the arts center. These paths keep pedestrians above street traffic and create a quieter environment. Between the towers and terrace blocks are gardens, lakes, and fountains. The landscaping softens the hard lines of the buildings and gives residents green views from their balconies. The arts center is at the heart of the site, with concert halls, theaters, cinemas, and galleries surrounded by public foyers and cafes. The design blurs the boundary between private and public, so residents and visitors share many of the same spaces. For the people who live there, the Barbican offers a way of life that feels distinct from the rest of London. Apartments are spacious by city standards, with large windows, generous balconies, and open-plan layouts. Sound from the streets is muted by the height and orientation of the buildings. The high walks create safe, car-free routes for walking, and the gardens offer quiet places to sit. The estate's density means neighbors often meet in shared spaces, from lifts to the arts center's foyers, creating a community that is rare in central London. Many residents speak of the pleasure of returning home and feeling as if they have stepped into another world, even though they are minutes from busy streets and major transport hubs. The Barbican has become a symbol of brutalism's revival. Where once it was dismissed as outdated and severe, it is now featured in architectural tours, coffee table books, and social media feeds. Its design is studied in architecture schools as an example of how large-scale brutalism can integrate housing, culture, and green space. The very qualities that once drew criticism, its bold forms, its unapologetic use of concrete, its separation from the street, are now part of its appeal. For some, it represents a period when London built with ambition, aiming to combine art, housing, and public space in one cohesive plan. For others, it stands as proof that with good maintenance, active use, and thoughtful programming, brutalist architecture can not only survive but thrive. In Eastern Europe, and across the former Soviet Union, brutalism often took the form of monumental civic structures. These were buildings meant to project the power and stability of the state, such as government ministries, cultural palaces, and vast sports arenas. Their scale was enormous, with facades stretching for hundreds of meters and plazas large enough for mass gatherings. Many were decorated only by the shadows cast by deep recesses and projecting slabs. In cities like Belgrade, Kiev, and Moscow, these structures still stand as reminders of an era when architecture was used to shape public life on a grand scale. They were designed to impress as much as to serve, and the weight of their forms reflected the authority behind them. In India, Le Corbusier's Capitol complex in Chandigarh is one of the most significant brutalist works outside Europe. Built in the 1950s as part of the new capital for the state of Punjab, it includes the Legislative Assembly, the High Court, and the Secretariat. Each building is cast in raw concrete, with bold sculptural forms that respond to the region's climate. Deep overhangs shade the interiors, and brazen solar panels break up the sun's glare. Le Corbusier treated the complex as a symbol of India's independence and modern identity, using monumental geometry to convey both stability and progress. The design also shows how brutalism could adapt to different conditions, with forms shaped by the intense light and heat of the Indian plains. Across Africa, brutalism took on regional adaptations that blended the style's principles with local materials and needs. In countries like Ghana, Kenya, and Côte d'Ivoire, architects combined exposed concrete with features such as wide verandas, perforated screens, and angled walls to promote airflow. These changes made buildings cooler and more comfortable in hot climates while keeping the monumental scale and material honesty of the style. Universities, government buildings, and cultural centers from this period often stand as markers of newly independent nations asserting their presence with modern architecture. Their designs carried a sense of optimism, linking the raw material strength of brutalism with the practical realities of their locations. In Australia, the Sirius building in Sydney became one of the most contested brutalist landmarks. Built in the late 1970s as public housing, it sits in the Rocks, an area near the harbour where development pressures are high. Its stepped concrete form, with stacked apartment modules, was designed to give each unit a view and outdoor space. For decades, it housed low-income residents in a prime location, a visible commitment to social housing in the city centre. When the government moved to sell and demolish it, citing maintenance costs and development opportunities, protests erupted. Heritage advocates, architects and community members argued that it was an important example of both brutalist design and housing policy. The battle over Sirius became a symbol of the tension between preservation, social equity, and real estate profit in growing cities. North America has its own notable brutalist landmarks. In California, the Geisel Library at the University of California, San Diego, designed by William Pereira, stands like a concrete sculpture lifted above the campus on a narrow base. Its faceted exterior, with glass walls framed by concrete ribs, makes it one of the most distinctive university buildings in the country. The form suggests both futuristic ambition and structural daring, and it has become a symbol of the campus itself. In Montreal, Habitat 67, designed by Moshe Safdie for Expo 67, reinterprets brutalism through a modular system of stacked concrete boxes. Each unit has its own terrace, and the arrangement creates a mix of private and shared spaces. The project was intended as a prototype for high-density urban housing that felt open and connected to nature. While it was never replicated on a large scale, it remains a landmark for its combination of raw concrete, geometric experimentation, and livable design. These examples show how brutalism spread across continents and adapted to local contexts, whether serving as symbols of state power, expressions of national identity, experiments in housing, or centers of learning. The style's reliance on exposed concrete and structural clarity allowed it to take many forms. In each case, the architecture reflected both the ideals and the challenges of its time, carrying the weight of political, social and environmental conditions in its solid, uncompromising forms. Brutalism entered a rough period in the 1980s. Public taste shifted toward color, ornament, and smaller scale. Postmodernism brought back columns, arches, and historical reference, which made raw concrete look severe and out of date. Owners also faced rising maintenance bills. Many buildings had thin waterproofing, thermal bridges, and exposed joints. Water reached the reinforcing steel, rusted it, and caused spalling. Repairs treated symptoms rather than causes, as budgets shrank. Elevators failed, roofs leaked, and forecourts cracked. Headlines mocked concrete as a blight, rather than a material with its own craft. Energy rules changed the conversation as well. Concrete frames could last a century, but many envelopes leaked heat. Single glazing, uninsulated walls, and roof joints performed poorly, so operating costs climbed in public buildings. Some owners boxed in balconies, or swapped original windows for cheaper units that spoiled proportions. Others deferred work, and watched systems fail. When a building felt cold and looked tired, calls for demolition grew. By the end of the decade, many people saw these structures as symbols of failure, rather than civic ambition. Robin Hood Gardens in London became a touchstone for the backlash. Allison and Peter Smithson designed the estate in the late 1960s as streets in the sky. Two long blocks framed a green mound that shielded homes from a major road. The concrete showed its making, and access decks linked doors like a traditional street. Early residents praised space, light, and views. Over time, maintenance lagged, lifts broke, and decks gathered wind and litter. Funding cuts hit management, and noise and crime fed a story that blamed the architecture. After years of petitions and expert reports, the estate was not given full protection. Demolition began in 2017 as part of the Blackwall Reach redevelopment. A section of the facade was saved for a museum, but the larger urban idea gave way to a mix of new blocks and streets. Birmingham Central Library met a similar fate. John Madden's design opened in 1974 as an inverted ziggurat that stepped outward as it rose. The library made a bold civic statement at the city's heart, with a clear plan and a dramatic reading room. Its heavy forms split opinion from day one. Supporters saw a major piece of civic architecture. Opponents saw a bunker that turned its back on the street. Leaks, concrete decay, and dated services mounted. Proposals to refurbish stalled while a new library opened nearby. In the mid-2010s, the city cleared the site, and the concrete frame came down to make way for the Paradise Office scheme. The loss removed a landmark and erased a chapter of post-war planning in the city core. In Chicago, Prentice Women's Hospital showed another side of the problem. Bertrand Goldberg designed a cloverleaf concrete tower over a narrow base. The plan shortened nurse travel and wrapped patients around shared cores. The structure was daring, with shell forms and a compact stem that opened the ground plane. When medical needs changed, the hospital moved to a new facility, and the building lost its program. Northwestern University argued that its floor plates did not fit modern research labs. Preservationists proposed adaptive reuse, and engineers outlined paths to thread new services through the structure. After a public fight and a denied landmark bid, demolition proceeded in 2014. A biomedical research building now occupies the site. These cases share familiar themes. Each building carried a strong public purpose. Each endured years of deferred maintenance. Each faced a choice between deep retrofit and full replacement. And in each case the decision-makers claimed that reuse cost more or limited future use. Those calculations often ignored embodied carbon. They also discounted social value, cultural memory, and the waste stream that demolition creates, from crushed concrete to displaced communities. The environmental case against demolition has grown stronger. Concrete and steel carry heavy carbon loads, and the energy used to make them is locked into the frame. When we destroy a sound structure, we throw that energy away and spend more to pour a new one. Reusing a frame, even with a new envelope and services, often saves large amounts of carbon over a building's life. Deep retrofit can add insulation, high-performance glazing, and efficient systems. It can fix thermal bridges, cure leaks, and improve comfort. It can also preserve urban form and shorten construction schedules. There are practical gains too. Retrofit spreads work across phases and keeps a place active. Tenants stay in the area, and local jobs remain on site. Waste drops, and truck movements fall. Street trees, utilities, and transport links survive intact. The city avoids years of vacant land behind hoardings and the social drag that comes with it. When owners keep original proportions and details, they also keep civic dignity that many brutalist works give to daily public life. A repaired concrete surface can look rich. You can see the grain of the formwork and the care of the poor. Not every building can or should be saved. Some are too damaged. Some carry plans that no longer meet any program, but the default to demolition wastes carbon and culture. Better processes can narrow the gap. Independent audits can set out true costs and benefits of reuse, including carbon. Early energy models can compare retrofit with new build in plain terms. Maintenance funds can stop decay before it sets in. In housing, resident voice can guide priorities for upgrades, from windows to heating to security and safety. In civic buildings, public use can drive ground floor changes that add life. The 1980s backlash came from a mix of taste, policy, and money. The concrete itself was not the villain. Where owners repaired fabric, upgraded services, and opened ground floors to activity, public opinion often softened. Where cuts stripped out care, decay followed. The lesson is stewardship. Many structures from that era still stand ready for a second life. With careful repair and smart adaptation, they can serve new needs without erasing the hopes poured into their frames. Brutalism's return began online. People started sharing photos of concrete landmarks and posting short histories that made the buildings feel legible. The feed format rewarded strong shapes and sharp shadows, so ribbed walls, deep overhangs, and board-formed textures spread fast. Viewers learned names, locations, and dates. They compared notes on architects and plans. What was once a niche interest became a public conversation. Researchers have linked this renewed attention to real-world outcomes, as posts rallied support when a building faced demolition or neglect. The images did more than look good. They taught people how to read the spaces they already passed each day. Out of this energy came focused campaigns. #SOS Brutalism, started by the Deutsches Architekturmuseum and partners, built a live database that tracks buildings worldwide and flags those at risk. Entries marked red signal danger, entries marked blue record a save. The site now lists more than 2,000 projects, and it links each one to background, status, and sources, so a post can turn into a dossier with a few taps. That mix of open data and simple tags changed the pace of advocacy. A call to action on social media can now point straight to an entry with contacts, history and updates. Adaptive reuse sits at the heart of the revival. It aligns love of place with practical needs and carbon goals. Some of the best stories come from buildings that once looked doomed. In Hamburg, the St. Maximilian Kolbe Church, nicknamed the toilet paper roll for its spiral plan, was slated to be torn down. Its concrete needed repair, and the parish could not carry the cost. Local officials, heritage groups, and a care provider stepped in with a plan to keep the structure and give it social use. The city announced a rescue. The shell would be repaired and converted into a community and care center rather than rubble. The building stayed, and the neighborhood kept a landmark that people recognized from a glance. Berlin's Maus Bunker tells a related story. The former animal labs, known for their sloped walls and triangular vents, once faced demolition. Years of public pressure, exhibitions, walkthroughs and on-site talks reframed it in the public eye. In 2023, the city granted monument protection. The building is now safe while teams study future uses. Architects and activists also used the case to argue for policy that treats reuse as the default rather than the risky option. The win showed how a media campaign, a clear database entry, and steady on-the-ground work can bend an outcome. Social media helps because it moves across scales. A single photo can show a facade detail or a whole urban ensemble. A thread can show a roof terrace at noon, a plaza in rain, or the grain of old formwork. That makes the case for care rather than replacement. People see that a building is more than a silhouette. It is a network of spaces and routines that change over a day. When a post links to a call for comments or a local meeting, online interest becomes civic action. #SOS Brutalism's color code reinforces this shift. Red means act, blue means the work paid off. It is a simple language for complex situations. Adaptive reuse also advances social goals. Churches, labs and offices need new roles as cities change. Concrete shells offer long spans, high floor-to-floor heights and robust cores. These traits suit studios, clinics, libraries and housing. In Hamburg, the Kolbe project paired preservation with elder care and community services. In Berlin, the Maus Bunker's great volume and thick envelope suggest archives, education or mixed cultural use once the interior is reworked. The structure may be tough, but that toughness is an asset. It allows insertion, subtraction, and careful routing of new systems without new foundations or street disruption. Sustainability gives the revival its strongest frame. Demolishing a sound concrete building throws away the carbon already spent in its cement, steel and transport. Reuse keeps that carbon in place. A deep retrofit can then cut operating energy to modern standards. Teams start with a fabric-first approach, insulate roofs and spandrels, fix thermal bridges at slab edges, and add high-performance glazing that respects the original module. Careful air sealing and new ventilation with heat recovery improve comfort, reduce drafts and protect the structure from moisture. On facades with board-formed concrete, repair can keep the texture while adding a thin internal insulation line and smart vapor control to manage dew points safely. Structure comes next. Engineers survey cover depth and rebar condition, then choose targeted repairs. They remove loose material, clean steel, and patch with compatible mortars. On chloride-contaminated elements, they may add cathodic protection to stop corrosion. Where seismic demand has changed, they add fiber wraps or new shear walls in low visibility zones. These moves protect the frame without heavy visual impact. Owners get decades of new life and a building that still looks like itself. Services complete the picture. Old plants give way to efficient heat pumps, variable speed fans and demand-controlled ventilation. Roofs host photovoltaics. Smart controls trim loads at night and during low use. Daylight sensors coordinate with the deep window reveals common in brutalism. Together these upgrades can match or beat many new build energy models, while avoiding the waste and disruption of a teardown. The carbon math is simple: keep the frame, fix the envelope, and right-size the systems. Preservation campaigns have learned to speak in these terms. A good dossier combines heart and numbers, photographs and stories alongside embodied carbon figures and phasing plans. That balance helps planners and owners say yes. It also shows neighbors what they gain: faster work, fewer trucks and a familiar landmark that now performs better. When campaigners can point to a database entry, a clear risk status and a precedent like Kolbe or the Maus Bunker, they shift debate from taste to outcomes. The question becomes not "do you like concrete?" But does this plan deliver social value with a smaller footprint? Social media will not replace local organizing, but it gives campaigns reach and speed. A post can summon expertise from afar, surface drawings and articles, and connect people who care. The best efforts blend that network with site walks, open meetings and transparent budgets. They borrow the simple tools that worked for #SOS brutalism, clear tagging, living maps, direct links, and apply them to each case. What began as photos of striking forms now reads as a manual for care. The result is a growing list of saved buildings and a broader sense that concrete giants can live new lives, cleanly and well. Habitat 67 began as an experiment for Montreal's World Expo. Moshe Safdie was in his 20s when he carried the idea from his graduate thesis to the fair. His question was direct: can high-density housing offer the light, air, and private outdoor space of a suburban house? Expo 67 gave him a stage and funding to build a working prototype. Set on the St. Lawrence River, the project greeted visitors as they approached. The goal was not a showpiece, but a place people could truly live. The method was modular. Workers cast reinforced concrete boxes in a nearby yard, installed services under cover, and lifted the units into place with cranes. Each module was room-sized. Thick walls and floors held ducts, pipes, and wiring. Boxes locked together in offset stacks, so the roof of a lower unit became the terrace of the unit above. The result was a stepped landscape of homes with gardens and wide views. Bridges and elevator towers broke long walks into short, clear paths. Safdie's vision joined three aims. He wanted urban density that used less land and infrastructure. He wanted the privacy and outdoor life of a house. He wanted the speed and quality control of factory production. The modules were repetitive, but the combinations produced variety. So many apartments felt distinct. Living rooms could double in height, bedrooms opened to terraces, corner windows framed river and skyline. The system read like an urban hill town built from a single kit of parts, with light and air crossing through each home. Shared paths, lift lobbies and terraces formed small neighborhoods in the air, giving casual meetings a place to occur without forcing contact. That mix encouraged trust. As a World Expo project, Habitat 67 drew attention out of scale with its size. Millions visited the fair and toured the building. Newspapers ran photos of families on planted terraces and children leaning on concrete rails. The message was clear: modern housing did not need to be a flat slab of small rooms and long balconies. Safdie hoped the prototype would lead to mass production and whole districts of modules, but costs, logistics and politics stalled that dream. Even so, the design has had a long afterlife. Architects studying mid- and high-rise housing return to its principles. The idea of a vertical village appears in stepped blocks with large terraces, in timber and steel modular systems, and in mixed-use stacks that blend privacy with shared life. You can trace a line to projects that carve outdoor rooms, improve cross-ventilation, and break big masses into smaller pieces. Developers also learned a simple lesson: a generous balcony and a view can turn dense housing into a desirable address. Habitat 67 also shaped debates about how we build. Its clear structure helps maintenance planning, and its outdoor rooms support planting that cools and shades. The scheme favors daylight and view. A resident can step outside without a lift ride or a trip to a park. In short summers, that access turns sunny days into time to sit or share a meal at home. Density feels generous when space works in 3 dimensions. Many people group Habitat 67 with brutalism because of its exposed concrete and frank structure, yet it aged better than many concrete estates. Several reasons stand out. The first is layout. Instead of endless corridors and blank gables, Habitat breaks mass into small clusters with frequent openings. You see sky everywhere. Terraces pull life outdoors and invite care. Residents tend plants and set out chairs, which softens the look and deters neglect. The second is scale. The stepped form lowers apparent height, cuts wind and reduces noise from traffic and crowds. Stewardship is a third reason. Over time, many units shifted to private and cooperative ownership, and residents invested in upkeep because they had a direct stake. Waterproofing, windows and mechanical systems followed planned cycles. Roof membranes and drains got attention, which matters in a building where roofs are also patios. Construction quality helped too. The modules left the yard with finishes in place, which reduced on-site errors. Joints between boxes were designed, not improvised. Services ran through clear chases, so later work could follow the same paths. When upgrades arrived, the system's clarity made them easier to execute. Engineers could trace loads, seal critical seams, and add insulation without guesswork. Maintenance teams knew where to open walls and where not to drill. The structure's legibility saved time and protected the fabric. Residents felt that care and returned it through gardening, cleaning and simple watchfulness. Small acts multiplied, and the place kept its vitality through harsh winters and river winds. Influence continues in new housing strategies. Architects adapt stacked private outdoor rooms to social housing, senior living, and student schemes. They pair the idea with digital models, precise formwork, and high-performance envelopes. Builders test hybrid modules with concrete cores and timber rooms to cut carbon. Cities reward deep balconies, shading and shared roof gardens. Few projects copy Habitat's exact module, but many borrow its logic, break the mass, bring in light and keep outdoor space within reach of every room. It also teaches caution. The dream of cheap universal modular housing proved hard in practice. Casting, transport and craning need tight tolerances and skilled teams. Factory work helps quality but shifts costs up front. Standard parts save time but can limit change later. Each site brings wind, sun and soil that push the kit in new directions. The prototype recorded both promise and constraint, and that record lets others try again with better tools, clearer budgets and more flexible systems. Habitat 67 began as a showpiece and became a neighborhood. People built routines there, raised families, and aged in place. The design's social script is simple: give each home light on two sides, a patch of sky, and a door that leads to a shared path, and daily life improves. That is why the building still feels fresh decades later. Concrete reads as warm when the plan grants sun, view, planting and choice. The project remains a touchstone when we ask how dense cities can house people well. One of the most common myths about brutalism is that it is all ugly. Beauty is subjective, and many people respond to a building's proportions, rhythm, and details without even realizing it. In the best brutalist works, there is a careful balance between weight and openness, between solid walls and deep shadows. Board-formed concrete carries the imprint of the timber used to shape it, giving the surface a natural texture that changes in different light. Patterns of windows, recesses, and projecting balconies can be as precise and deliberate as any carved ornament. A well-designed brutalist building may look simple at first glance, but closer study often reveals a high level of craft and intent in the way it was drawn, engineered, and built. Another misunderstanding is that brutalism is all concrete. While exposed concrete is a hallmark, many brutalist projects use a mix of materials: brick, stone, steel, and glass, often work alongside concrete to create variety and contrast. In some cases, timber is used for cladding, or in interior finishes, to soften the feel of the structure. The National Theatre in London, for example, combines raw concrete with large areas of glass that open views to the city and the Thames. In the United States, certain university buildings blend concrete frames with brick infill, giving warmth to the exterior while keeping the clarity of the structural expression. Concrete may dominate the visual identity, but it is rarely the only material in use. It is also often claimed that brutalism ignores nature. Many notable examples show the opposite. The Barbican estate in London is wrapped in gardens, ponds and tree-lined walkways, which soften the scale of the buildings and bring life to the spaces between them. Le Corbusier's Unité de Habitation in Marseille includes a rooftop terrace with views of the sea and the mountains, and the design maximizes cross-ventilation and daylight. In tropical climates, brutalist forms often adapt to local conditions with deep overhangs, open courtyards, and planted terraces to create cooler microclimates. Habitat 67 in Montreal integrates nature by turning the roofs of lower units into gardens for the units above. The combination of planting and geometry makes the building feel connected to its riverside setting, rather than sealed off from it. Another myth is that brutalism is outdated, a relic of the post-war decades, with no relevance today. In fact, many contemporary architects take inspiration from its principles. The emphasis on structural honesty, the celebration of raw materials, and the integration of public and private space all appear in current projects. Some new buildings reinterpret brutalist massing and texture with advanced materials, high-performance insulation, and energy systems that meet modern environmental standards. Others adapt the style's sense of monumentality to new contexts, using stepped terraces, deep reveals, and bold cantilevers. The popularity of adaptive reuse for brutalist landmarks also shows that these buildings can be upgraded to meet present needs without losing their character. Misconceptions often arise from the weakest examples of the style, where budget cuts, poor detailing, or lack of maintenance undercut the original design intent. When people see neglected concrete stained by water or housing blocks stripped of their shared spaces, they may assume that all brutalism is the same. In reality, the difference between a neglected building and a well-cared-for one is dramatic. With proper cleaning, repair and sensitive upgrades, the material and form can look as strong and deliberate as the day they were built. The myths fade when people encounter a brutalist space that is lively, well-maintained, and integrated into its setting. At that point, the conversation shifts from whether the style is ugly, cold or outdated to how it can continue to serve in a changing world. Brutalism still matters because it forces a conversation about what buildings should be and how they should serve. Its most striking works are impossible to ignore. They ask people to react, whether with admiration or dislike, and in doing so they invite questions about the role of architecture in public life. A brutalist library, housing estate, or theatre stands as a record of a moment when civic ambition shaped entire districts. Even those who dislike the style often admit that it carries a kind of presence missing from many newer developments. The debate it sparks keeps alive the idea that architecture can be more than background. It can be a statement about values, priorities, and shared identity. Its influence is visible in modern industrial and minimalist design. Many contemporary buildings use stripped-down forms, exposed structure, and a limited palette of materials in ways that echo brutalism's directness. Industrial loft conversions, with their visible concrete columns, steel beams, and ductwork, draw on the same idea that the building's bones can be part of its aesthetic. Minimalist houses and galleries often use bare concrete walls as a deliberate counterpoint to glass or timber, showing how texture and mass can shape a calm, clear space. Even when the finish is smoother or the proportions lighter, the lineage from brutalism's celebration of structure is clear. The style has also influenced sustainable architecture. The 21st century has brought new urgency to questions about how long buildings last, how they use energy, and how they can adapt over time. Brutalism's reliance on durable materials and simple structural systems offers lessons for low-maintenance, long-life construction. Many brutalist buildings were designed to integrate daylight, manage heat gain with deep overhangs, and use thermal mass to regulate temperature. These ideas are now part of sustainable design practice. In adaptive reuse projects, existing brutalist frames provide a strong base for high-performance retrofits that cut carbon emissions without the environmental cost of demolition and new construction. At the core of brutalism is the principle of honesty in materials. This means showing a material as it truly is, without covering or disguising it to mimic something else. In the 21st century, when synthetic finishes and composite products can make one material look like another, the call for material honesty feels relevant again. Architects and clients are increasingly aware of the environmental and ethical impacts of what they specify. Exposing concrete, steel, or timber not only tells the truth about the structure, but can also reduce the need for extra finishes, adhesives, and coatings. It can make maintenance easier and extend the life of the building by allowing problems to be seen and addressed early. Honesty in materials also builds trust between the building and its users. When you can see how a beam supports a roof or how a wall holds up a floor, you understand something about the building's logic. This understanding can deepen a sense of connection to the place. A modern example might be a school where the structural frame is left visible, allowing students to see the physical reality of the space they occupy. The same principle applies in a workplace, gallery, or home. When the structure is part of the visual language, the building feels more grounded and authentic. Brutalism's ongoing relevance comes from these layered contributions. It challenges taste, influences style, and offers practical lessons for building well. In a time when architecture is expected to respond to environmental limits, social needs, and cultural context, the style's best works show how strong forms, durable materials, and functional clarity can come together. Whether or not a person likes the look of a particular brutalist building, the questions it raises and the values it expresses continue to matter. Picture yourself once more, standing under Boston City Hall. The concrete still rises in bold, angular masses above you. The overhangs still throw deep shadows that stretch across the plaza. Your footsteps still echo, sharp against the hard surfaces. But now the scene carries more layers than it did at the start. You know the origins of béton brut, the pressures of post-war reconstruction, and the ideals that shaped buildings like this. You see the marks of the formwork not as roughness, but as a record of how the building came into being. The scale feels deliberate rather than careless, a choice to make a civic building that commands attention. This new frame also brings awareness of the gap between ambition and outcome. You can imagine the hope of the planners who saw such a structure as a statement of democracy, permanence, and shared ownership. You can also sense why others experience it as cold or overbearing, especially if they have walked through similar plazas that fell into neglect. In this way, brutalism becomes a mirror. It reflects the aspirations of a society that wanted to house people, provide services, and create public spaces on a grand scale. At the same time, it shows the failures to maintain, to adapt, and to meet the human needs that give life to architecture. The concrete is the same as when you first stood here, but your reading of it has changed. You now carry the voices of those who fought to save buildings, the examples of adaptive reuse that turned a demolition order into a new purpose, the cautionary tales of projects that lost their way, and the lessons from structures that aged well because they were cared for. You know that the material can be both stubborn and flexible, capable of holding the weight of utopian dreams or the evidence of their collapse. As you stand there, you may find that you still don't like the look of it, or perhaps you like it more than you expected. Either way, it is no longer just a strange mass of concrete in the city. It is part of a larger story about how we build, what we value, and how our choices endure in physical form long after the debates that shaped them have faded. You may hate it, you may love it, but you'll never forget it.